So we move to our first piece, the Merovingian looped fibula. And in this case, a fibula is basically something we've seen before. It's effectively a brooch to hold up the end of a toga or a a cape, basically. Obviously, people are wearing multiple layers, and Roman fashion is still there. People are still wearing togas, etc., but they're evolving into more of a cape than they would have been in Roman times. And this is done in gold, with this incredible decorative pattern added to it. The decorative pattern is meant to accentuate the form and amplify the form and structure. Now, as we look at it, we have an eagle head at the bottom. That eagle head is there to denote power. Images of any kind of animal of prey or bird of prey will always denote power. The fish denotes Christianity, but also mimics the general form of the fibula. And we see other symbols here, such as a cross, again speaking to Christianity. The duck heads, or stylized duck heads on either side, are there to show power again, sort of that idea of the eagle and the duck, the eagles ruling over the ducks as people saw it at the time. And it's adorned with precious stones. In this case, each of these is a cut stone, as we see here. You can see the back of it, and you see those cut stones put in place and polished. And those would have been precious stones at the time, just like our garnets on the purse cover from Sutton Hoo. Now, as we move forward, we move into the Carolingian dynasty. Now, the Carolingians are sort of the people in the background for the Merovingians. They're the ones who have access to power. They are the gatekeepers, and they're slowly going to take over. They're going to expand power by making their post hereditary, and then Pepin, a man by the name of Pepin in 687, leads his army to start conquering other groups. A little bit later, we have Charles the Hammer Martel. I love these nicknames. Now, Charles the Hammer Martel will fight the Muslim armies in 732 at Tours. This is as Islam is expanding out of Spain and trying to push into France. His leadership provided a united response amongst the Franks, and he won many other battles, thus consolidating power over the Franks and extending the borders. This is really where the Carolingians take over for the Merovingians. Now, he dies in 741, divides the land between his two sons, Carloman, who's more or less irrelevant to this story, and Pepin the Short. Yes, he's known as Pepin the Short. At this point, the Merovingians are basically puppet kings. They're being controlled by the Carolingians, and they know it, and they're going to disappear rapidly. Pepin the Short writes to the papacy for help. In 751, Pepin the Short is anointed king by a papal representative, thus formally ending Merovingian reign and ushering in the Carolingians. And the most famous leader, Pepin the Short's son, is known as Charles the Great, or Charles the Bald, also known as Charlemagne. And what we're looking at is an equestrian portrait of Charlemagne. Now, Charlemagne is well trained in the liberal arts. In 800, Charlemagne becomes emperor of the Romans. Again, they're trying to recreate the Roman Empire. Everyone's trying to recreate the Roman Empire. It's sort of like today we see people trying to recreate the 1950s and 60s, because that's when they were children. That's when these people were growing up, so they have great nostalgia for the period. In this case, they're looking back and going, wow, mankind hasn't done well in Europe since the Romans. So they're trying to go back to that. And he's going to be crowned by Pope Leo III. This action creates a mutually beneficial relationship. Charlemagne gets the backing of the papacy, and the papacy gets yet another army. And we get the equestrian portrait. And this is a very odd-looking portrait. It looks too simplistic. For example, Charlemagne doesn't seem to have any neck. He seems to have a massive hand, that hand holding the globe, and he seems to be massive compared to the size of the horse, although we've seen these ideas before. In the portrait, the globe represents that he's the ruler over the world. Of course, they know there's more to the world than what Charlemagne rules, but it's a symbol of power anyway. And we see this simplification, and it's unclear amongst scholars. There's constantly argument over whether or not this is a stylization, so it's intentional, or whether this is an issue of lost knowledge. It's simply clumsy because they don't know how to do any better. And Charlemagne gets special treatment because, of course, he's developing the liberal arts and the use of Latin and pushing literacy in his kingdom, an issue that will become important later. Now, I do want to compare this to another equestrian statue that we've seen, the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius. And when we look at the two, obviously the image of Marcus Aurelius is far more realistic, although the size of Marcus to his horse is similar to what we see with Charlemagne to his. It doesn't help our argument, but it does show sort of the high point of Rome versus the high point of the medieval, which is sort of what we're in right now. We're in the Carolingian Renaissance, where we see conscious and deliberate revival of the ancient Roman state and a flourishing of visual arts. This Renaissance is really embodied in this equestrian portrait, this attempt to return to the grandeur of Rome, although this equestrian portrait sits on a desk or a shelf, and Marcus Aurelius was, of course, life-size. But if you leave that completely aside, they're kind of not really the same. I can't even make that argument. But that's the argument that's frequently made, that they're trying to get back to this grandeur of Rome.